through the years we've been pretty silent about this topic because it's not a nice topic. It can be hurtful and it can be scary because we don't know how to deal with it. I'm just thinking of my mum here in her generation. You know, it would never have been talked about, so I admire my mum for coming today. And it's good to see some grandparents here too, because you can pass on the information to your children and to your grandchildren to help them out. Karina's here to help me today, even though it was advertised that I was going to do this, but Karina has had experience in this area and she's going to tell her story, and then I'm going to speak to you about how I felt as a mum.
Just before I started school, my mum and dad decided that they'd like to have a sea change. They decided that with 2 kids that it was time to get out of the city and bring up their kids in a safe environment. And so they found a place that they'd like to move to, and we moved a couple of hours down south on the south coast. It was an ideal setting. We were only a couple of minutes away from the beach, and I'll see if I can paint the picture for you. There was a main road and our road, and on the corner there was this big brick house, double-storey house. It was big, and it had a really nice immaculate garden, and it was facing the other road. And then behind that house there was an empty paddock, and in that paddock there was an oak tree on one side close to the 2-storey house, and on the other side there was a row of pine trees, and they were a little bit on the boundary, the back boundary of that paddock too. So it was a child's playground to play under all these trees. But not only that, the house and the land that we lived on, we had one of those beach houses, double-storey beach houses, and there was a veranda that ran along the front of the house, and when you were standing out on the veranda you could look out and you could actually see the water and see the sea from where we were. And our backyard was really long. In fact, Dad would only mow half of it because it took too long to mow the whole lot of it. And Dad also got himself a postie bike, and he used to take us for rides on this little motorbike. So it was a great place to be, or so we thought. When we moved down there, we found the local church and we attended there, and we discovered that the people living in this big house on the corner actually went to that church. Well, the mother did, and her son. Their father was an older type man, and he wasn't interested in religion, and so he would spend a lot of his time out on his boat sailing and leave the religion to his wife and son. And by all accounts, it seemed like an ideal setting. Now, what Mum and Dad thought that was the ideal place, that it was a good place to bring up their children, and they didn't know that one of the people that we would come in contact with would turn out to be my abuser. My abuser turned out to be the boy that lived on the corner in the house. He was only 5 years older than me. And Mum and Dad would have had no idea what was happening. You know, this was the neighbour's boy. We went to church with this boy. It was good to have another child in the area that me and my brother could play with. They never thought anything of it. And I never told them. I kept quiet. I didn't feel I was able to share that with them. I guess I thought because he was older than me, they probably wouldn't listen. And they'd probably believe his story over my story. I guess I didn't trust them enough, really. I should have. And it didn't happen. I was grateful that within a couple of years of being down there, the business that Dad had been trying to do didn't work out, and so we packed up and moved back to Penrith. And I guess being back here, I didn't have to tell them what had happened because I was now safe. That wasn't going to happen anymore. If you move forward a few years to when I was 12 years old, I had an experience where I was abused again by a family friend. And this time I came home and I did tell Mum and Dad, and they didn't believe me. They said, "Oh, no, I think you're just imagining it. No, I don't think it'll happen." You see, because I'd been abused previously, I had this habit of trying to get out of going to school and making up things, and so I think that could have been a part of it as well. And so I decided I'd just keep it all to myself. I wouldn't tell anybody, because who was going to believe me, particularly that a 5-year-old boy could abuse a child. And so I got on with life. I went to college, met Michael, got married, and that's when things started to fall apart. And we started having troubles, and I started seeing a counsellor, and it was through that experience that I saw what had happened to me for what it was, that it was actual abuse. And so I started having counselling, and I decided that I would tell Mum and Dad, that they needed to know. And so we were down here in Sydney actually we had Christmas up at Kempsey with the family, and it was at that time that I told them one-on-one. First I think I told Mum, we were out going for a walk, and then I told Dad. And it wasn't really fair the way that I told them, because I told them on the morning that we were leaving to go back to Queensland, and so I dumped and ran, which was kind of protecting me, but it wasn't good for them. And so a little while later I had a phone call. I remember talking with Mum, and Mum said to me in that phone call, are you sure it was abuse? Are you sure you weren't just playing mothers and fathers or doctors and nurses? And at the time I remember feeling disappointed. I remember it put doubts into my mind, because the doubts were already in my mind because of the young age of the boy. And afterwards I realised that it was just my mum's way of dealing with it, that she had to know for sure and for certain. But as time went on and I dealt with the abuse, I've had 2 breakdowns, I've been on antidepressants. It's been a long journey, but we're getting there in the end. And I do know that Mum and Dad do believe me and they do support me and they do care. And I know that anybody can get through this. It's just a matter of time. It's a matter of knowing the right people, having the right information, and hopefully that's what we're going to be able to give to you today, so that you can either prevent it happening or know what to do if you come across it.
Okay, as a parent, hearing your child tell you that they have been sexually abused is kind of like you want to go backwards and not believe it at all. When Karina told us, you kind of feel stunned, you go cold, you kind of feel, is it true, is it right? No, it's not. There's a lot of things go on in your mind. As for ringing her up and asking her, was it fathers and mothers or doctors and nurses? Yes, I did ask her that, because you want to think, well, children do play around when they're little, exploring each other, and that's kind of in some ways healthy for them to understand things. I remember going through a period of thinking, was I a bad mother? Why didn't I know that this happened? Why couldn't I see the signs? Now when I look back, because I've done a lot of learning in this area, I look back and I can see the signs that happened with Karina, and we'll talk about them a little bit later. So I decided that I couldn't handle the guilt, because I didn't feel like I could be there for her all the time, and no mother can ever be there every minute for their child. So I went and had some counselling, and it was probably the best thing I ever did. And I learnt that it wasn't my fault, and I can't be there all the time. And so being a Christian, I prayed to the Lord, and I thanked the Lord that I can speak with the Lord about the problems that we have. And I also learned that I needed to forgive myself. And once I forgave myself, then I felt the freedom to be able to support Karina a lot more. I remember Karina ringing up at 2 o'clock in the morning one night and asking me to come up, and I felt really bad because I didn't go and I should have gone. But we do learn these things along the way. It was a very difficult time, but we have been there and supported her ever since. We do believe what happened. I have done training at Safe Place Services, which is our Adventist Sexual Abuse Centre, and I've been able to learn how to phone counsel people who, not the perpetrator and not the victim, but people in the family that it's affected. And I've been doing that for 11 years, and I've really enjoyed doing that, and I've made people, I don't have a clue who they are, but I've made good friends with them and been able to support them along the way. I must say that as a mother-in-law, I really appreciate Michael, our son-in-law. He's stuck by Karina, and he's supported her all the way through. And that's something that I really, really appreciate, and I want him to know how much I appreciate him. So now we'll start with our talk. Okay. Let's start with what is child sexual abuse. Child sexual abuse is a basic lack of respect for children, and that comes from the Honourable Alastair Nicholson. He is a court judge, and he has seen a lot of this abuse through the courts. And that's what he calls child abuse. It's a basic lack of respect for our children. Child abuse comes in 4 main forms. There's physical abuse, which is beating your children. Yeah, okay, sorry. It's beating your children, like bashing, like physically hurting them. Emotional abuse, as in playing mind games, saying that you can't have this or I'll kill you, like saying things that you can't possibly go through with. Neglect, as in not looking after your child properly, not feeding them at right times, not putting them to bed, leaving them to their own devices. And then we come to sexual abuse, is what we're going to speak about today. Child sexual abuse occurs when an adult or a stronger person, a stronger child or an adolescent uses their power or authority to involve a child in sexual activity. Child sexual abuse can be kissing or holding a child in a sexual manner, exposing a sexual part to a child, having sexual relations with a child. Exhibitionism, like flashing, we call it today. Verbal suggestive sexual comments, touching a child's genitals, masturbation, any form of penetration, exposure to or involvement in child pornography, which may or not include use of the internet, and Karina's going to talk about that a little bit later. Oral sex, rape, incest, forcing a child to watch a sexual act, child prostitution, and it always involves the 3 S's. Shame, because it's happened to them. Silence, because usually the perpetrator scares the hell out of the victim, that they can't say anything, so they stay silent. And Karina said that she stayed silent because you respect your older people, and there's a whole reason we'll go into a little bit later. And secrecy, because the child wants to protect itself from being blamed, and they want to protect the perpetrator as well, because they're not sure what's going to happen to the person either. The effects of child sexual assault on society are more widespread than AIDS, heart disease or motor accidents. Every child is a potential risk. Offenders do not discriminate between socio-economic, religious or racial backgrounds. Some of this may be hard to handle and be offensive, but we are speaking the facts. It's 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be sexually assaulted in some way by age 18, and that comes from the Australian Institute of Criminology. Victims of child sexual assault are 18 times more likely to commit suicide and 49 times more likely to die from accidental drug overdose than the general population. That comes from CHU 2009, and CHU is a part of the Australian Institute of Technology. Collectively, Australians rate petrol prices, public transport and road issues of greater concern than child abuse. And that comes from the Australian Child Foundation in 2009. And that's probably pretty right. I did hear on the radio the other day that there's a lot more work being done in this area. And I just can't remember what they said. And I wrote it down on a piece of paper, but I couldn't find the piece of paper of what they were talking about. Children rarely lie about or imagine sexual assault. That comes from Dinfer House in 1990, and mostly they don't lie because children don't know what sex is. They don't understand any of that. They don't have words for it to even talk about it. So if they say something bad's happened to them, then they're usually not lying. The average age of exposure to the internet pornography in Australia is age 11. Karina's going to talk about the internet later. Only 25% of children will tell a parent about an encounter with a predator who solicited sex while online. That's from iSafe Incorporated, 2006. The percentage of boys between the ages of 10 to 14 becoming perpetrators is on the rise. And I think this is coming from internet pornography sites they may be looking at. And I just read from Bravehearts that it's 33% of perpetrators are between this age group, and that's scary. That's really scary.
Okay, first of all, let's have a look at, I'm going to talk about grooming, but before we get into the grooming part, let's have a look at the profile of a pedophile or a child abuser. If you were thinking of that type of person, what would you think? What would you think of? How would you describe them?
The usual way to describe someone as that is sleazy.
Sleazy?
Sleazy, the way they dress and that, you think you get them.
A dirty old man?
Dirty old man.
Yeah. Any others? That's generally the view that we have in our mind. We generally think that they're men, but you might be surprised. Let's have a look. Over 90% of reported abusers are male. That much we do know. Whether they're old or young is another story. At least 85% are familiar to the child. Usually it's a family member. The high statistics are family members. There is no distinctive psychological profile of an abuser. So you cannot put them into a box. What we think of a sleazy, dirty old man. No. It can be an old man, it can be a young man, it can be a boy. It can be a rich man or a poor man. It can be, we're now finding more and more women are abusing. So there's no set description or anything, but we can give you ideas of what to look for. It can be it could be your head elder, it could be your pastor, it could be the most fine, upstanding person in the neighbourhood, it could be the Australian of the Year, you wouldn't know. They come in a wide range of socio-economic, cultural, racial and religious backgrounds. And across the board, I've been looking at different websites for different religions, and different religions have, if you do this, look in the search engine, you'll find different news stories or different news reports for every different religion that you can think of. Many start abusing in adolescence. Convicted abusers are most commonly heterosexual men. You know, there was a myth out there that abusers are homosexual. Can be homosexual, can be heterosexual. 1 in 3 offenders are adolescents, which is what Mum was saying before, 30%. They may target children of the same, opposite or both genders. So boys are abusing boys, they can be abusing girls, they can be abusing both. Back in 1992, about 95% of victims knew their perpetrators. And in 1993, the statistics were the same. There was 5% of sexual case, only 5% of the sexual assault cases were to do with stranger danger. But if we go to 2005, most children know the perpetrator, with studies estimating that now it's 10 to 30% of offenders being strangers. So that's changed slightly. This is a quote here. I'll just summarise it because it takes a bit to understand. But basically what it's saying is that girls are more likely, or 17% more likely to be abused by stepfathers or a wife's de facto, a mother's de facto, than they are by their biological father. If it's their biological father, then it's only 2.3% likely to be abused. Firstly, sexual abuse may be committed not only by adults, but by anyone older or bigger. Often the perpetrators of sexual abuse are teenagers who take advantage of the vulnerability of much younger children. Juvenile offenders can be just as predatory, so these are the adolescents. They can be just as predatory as an adult when it comes to abuse. Their abuse is often well planned and thought out. They are protected by a silence that has been characterised by sexual abuse generally. Juvenile offenders learn that they can get away with it and have time to fine-tune the manipulative techniques which are characteristics of the offender. So basically what this is saying is young people are knowing what they're doing, and they're knowing that what they're doing is wrong, and they start calculating it. So if they start this young, you can imagine what they're like when they're older. The awareness of sexual abuse of children and young people by females is low, but professionals working in the field consistently report that it is much higher than the statistics indicate. Sexual abuse by females working in the teaching profession is now well recorded. The man that gave that quote, Jeff Kelly, I was sitting in one of his lectures a couple of months ago, and he was telling us of an incident that he was investigating where there was a female teacher and she had been grooming and abusing teenage girls that she'd been teaching in class. So it wasn't just her abusing boys, which is what you see in the news, she was abusing girls. Females do sexually abuse in a small proportion of cases. Approximately 5% of female victims and 20% of male victims experience sexual abuse perpetrated by a female. That's the statistics, I think, in 1984. I think I've got another, more recent statistic. Female sex offenders are responsible for 6% of all reported cases of sexual abuse. That's in 2006. But if we look at 2007, the statistic rose to 8.7%. So it is on the rise. I think generally it's probably higher than that too, but it's just not reported as often as it is against a man. Whether it's because they don't think the child will be believed, or whether it's a boy and it may not have the same kind of effect. See, not all abuse will affect people. Majority it will, but some people don't see it as that. Okay, so now we've looked at the profile of a pedophile or an abuser. So let's have a look at what is grooming. Grooming is a process of preparing a person, usually a child or another vulnerable person, for sexual assault. It includes establishing a special friendship with the child. Grooming can include the conditioning of parents, other adults and church leaders to think that the relationship with the child is normal and positive. So it's very secretive. You might not even have an idea. It could be your best friend. Grooming is the manipulative cultivation of a relationship in order to initiate or hide sexual abuse of an adult or a child. In the case of child abuse, an offender may groom not only the child, but also the child's parents, the family, the clergy and church workers, and others that are closely around the target. Okay, we're going to give you some ideas of grooming behaviour. It's typically subtle. That's why it's hard to put your finger on who can be an abuser. They're very subtle at what they do. They usually fly under the radar. It's difficult to pinpoint, and it's difficult to report, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Grooming can take place over days, weeks, or even years. This process is designed to build the trust of the child and often their family, as well as to create opportunities for the abuse to occur. Sometimes, if they're very good at what they do, it can be a matter of hours, but generally it does take longer. An abuser will identify and target potential children. Now, Mum was talking about the lollies before. It seems innocent, doesn't it, that an adult wants to give out lollies to children. But in this particular case, the man would give out the lollies, but he would say, you can only have a lolly if you sit on my knee. Now, there's a subtlety behind that behaviour. Do you know what he's trying to do? What he's trying to do is he's trying to pinpoint which children are vulnerable. If the children say, no, I'm not going to sit on your knee, and they pull away, he knows that that's not a target. But a child that will take the lolly and sit on his knee, he's got a good chance of grooming for abuse later on. They recruit children by becoming friends with the children's parents or becoming involved in activities that the children is involved in. I think I've got a statistic. Yep, I've got it further on. They gain the trust of the child and make the child feel special. And that's where it's confusing for the child, because they get this extra special care and attention from an adult, which is usually what they're wanting and lacking. But at the same time, that person's hurting them. So you've got the battle that goes on. They organise to see the child alone and encourage the child to keep secrets. And they begin sexually desensitising the child, either by touching them or showing them pornography. These are examples of grooming. They will transport a young person without appropriate arrangements. So I know of a teacher who was an abuser, and he would take girls home with him to his place under the guise that they needed extra tutoring. And it wasn't tutoring that they were getting at his place. It's things like that. It can be somebody picking your child up from school and bringing it home. You know, it's that sort of behaviour. They visit a young person at home or invite a young person to an adult's home or a private place without appropriate arrangements. So they don't ask the parents' permission, they just take the child with them, and they'll come up with some really good excuse as to why it happened. Sending or receiving correspondence of an inappropriate nature. This includes emails, SMS, and especially now through other social media like Facebook, and you would have no idea. In the instance with SMSs, sometimes the abuser will give the child a mobile phone and say, don't tell your parents. And so you won't even be aware of that happening or taking place. They develop an inappropriate relationship incompatible with a clergy relationship with the same or opposite sex. They cultivate a relationship of dependency with a mother and or the family. This is especially prevalent in a church setting. What they found is that part of the grooming process, when the abuser is looking for targets, they will often target single mothers. Or mothers where the husband is away a lot from home. And what they'll do is they'll make themselves invaluable to her. They will fix her car, do any odd job around the house, that sort of thing, get in the good books, win the children over by playing with them, that sort of thing, and that's how they get a foot in the door. They seek to exert authority over the child or within family relationships. This is interesting, this is a new one to me, but the abuser will seek to exert his authority or discipline a child even in front of the parents and act like another parent to the child. There's inappropriate giving and receiving of gifts. There's physical or emotional aggression, violence or bullying. This may not be as noticeable to you, but it will be noticeable to the child. Sexual exhibitionism, which Mum mentioned before. Exposure of a young person to pornographic material and any personal possession of the same. Now, with grooming, grooming is not a crime, so you cannot report it to the police. So if you notice any of these things happening or taking place, the people to report it to is someone like DOCS. If it's happening in the church, it would be your child safety officer. If it's at school, I'm sure they would have a child safety officer of some sort at the school. That would be the person to talk to. And a record is taken that what you have noticed and what's taken place. However, if you know that somebody is showing pornographic material to a young person, that is a crime. That can be reported and you can go to the police on that. But you need to make sure you've got that evidence. So if it's on the mobile phone or if it's on the internet, you need to make sure you keep that. Inappropriate discussion of sexual matters or behaviour. Obscene language, especially of a sexual nature. I kind of get goosebumps when I hear adults talking about sexual things in front of children. I don't think it's right. Doesn't necessarily mean they're an abuser, but regardless, I don't think it's right. Sexually suggestive gestures or actions. Jokes of a sexual nature in the presence of a young person. Voyeurism, that can be a matter of barging in on the young person when they're in the shower or when they're getting changed in their bedroom. Repeatedly seeking to be alone with a young person and detaining a child. A strong indicator is unease with the conduct. If you, as a sensible, responsible adult with some familiarity with the child and his or her circumstances, feel uneasy about the conduct of an adult focused on the child, that may be a strong indicator of grooming and you should respect your instinctive unease. Now, when I was sitting in the course and I was listening to the grooming and all that, I remember starting to think, oh, I know that man, oh, he could be, oh, that man, that applies to him. And I had to stop myself because we can look at those things and become very suspicious and suspect everybody, and that's not the idea. The idea is to make you aware of these sorts of things. And if you've got an unease, if you see something that makes you feel a bit uneasy, talk it over with somebody, and we'll give you some websites and things to go to so that you can get the information to see whether it is what you think it is or not. Okay, let's have a look at the indicators of child abuse. So what to look for in your children. The initial or short-term effects of child sexual assault usually occur during and within 2 years of the termination of sexual assault. So you'll notice within that time frame, of any of the short-term effects. These effects vary depending on the circumstances. The negative effects of child sexual assault can affect the survivor for many years and into adulthood, including depression and self-destructive behaviours. Many survivors also encounter problems in their adult relationships and in their adult sexual functioning. That's from Bravehearts. Child sexual assault could trigger psychosomatic responses. That is, you can feel sick or have a pain, but there's no medical reason why you have it. It's caused by stress or from emotional problems. Psychiatric disorders, long-lasting emotional problems, youth suicide, regression, that is going backwards. So a child that might have grown up and he's no longer wetting the bed or sucking his thumb might go back to that kind of behaviour. Sleeping and eating disorders, lack of self-esteem, that was one for me. Nightmares, self-harming and mutilation, self-hatred. I had a big problem with this one. Mum had to have some big talks with me on that. Promiscuous behaviour, aggression, behavioural changes, the changes in child's behaviour. Possible later effects of child sexual abuse, if it's not dealt with then and there. They can develop violent behaviour. They can develop criminal behaviour. There's long-term psychiatric problems, suicide, post-traumatic stress, sexual difficulties. That nearly ruined my marriage. Inability to form lasting relationships, a serious lack of self-confidence, marital problems, and poor parenting skills, alcohol and substance misuse. Okay, Caroline was asking if there was any signs that we could tell. Well, this here will tell us the physical symptoms that may be observed in the child. Pregnancy, sexually transmitted infections, bruises and bleeding, unusual odours, itching in the genital area, trauma to thighs, lower abdomen, abdominal pain or migraine, psychosomatic illness. The child has difficulty walking or sitting. Those are the physical symptoms if they've actually been very much physically abused. That will not always be the case. See, abuse can be hands-on, it can be penetration, it can be all those things, but sometimes you can catch the abuse before it gets to that stage, but that it's very hard. You're not always going to notice the physical signs because a lot of it is mental and emotional abuse, the mind games that the abuser plays with you. It might just be touching, in which case you won't have bruises and things like that. But there may be these symptoms, the behavioural symptoms. There's a fear of being hurt during nappy changing or dressing. There's a fear of being alone with a particular person. There's self-destructive behaviours. Prostitution, sleep disturbances, truancy and running away, loss of concentration. This was one for me. I found it very hard to concentrate at school. Eating and elimination disturbances. There's a withdrawal from friends. Well, I just didn't have friends, so there was none to withdraw from. Symptoms that may be observed in an adult who has been abused. So a child that hasn't told anybody, so they haven't dealt with the abuse when they were a child, this is what may be observed when they're an adult. Depression, that was me. Anger, fear and anxiety, guilt and shame, loneliness and isolation, sexual problems, dysfunctional parenting, strained relationships with family of origin, substance abuse, borderline personality disorder, eating disorders, dissociation, that is blocking it all out and not remembering it, and often that will come back later on in life in flashbacks, and people will remember it then. Skin carving, low self-esteem, re-victimisation experiences. That's where the person who's now an adult will put themselves into situations where they can be abused all over again. Feeling crazy or indifferent. Yes, I certainly felt like I was crazy at times. Post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay.
I'm just going to speak a bit about issues about when a child discloses. At first I'll talk about why a child does not disclose. Should I keep it a secret? The perpetrator talks about, this is our secret, don't tell anyone, it's just between you and me. And sometimes a child doesn't disclose because they feel like they're the one that's been responsible for what's happened. They also think that no one will believe them because they've been taught to respect the older person, so the older person will be respected rather than them. Others will blame them. They also think that they'll be the one that's punished, not the abuser. They will be blamed if the abuser goes to jail. And can you see in a lot of this how much guilt is put onto this poor person who's been abused? They will be blamed if the family breaks up. They will be blamed if others in the family are upset. They are bad in some way, and that's why the assault happened. That's a big one too, because often speaking with people who have been abused, and I have spoken to a few, and they say, I must have been bad in some way. And that comes across very heavily. They will not feel special anymore. As Karina said, the abuser can make the child feel very special, giving gifts, doing things for them, but they're scared that they won't be a special person anymore. They may feel guilty that they enjoy what's happening and they don't understand why. Okay, now what to do when a child discloses. And this is quite a hard topic too. You must stay calm and in control of your feelings, and often when it's been disclosed, you just want to have all hell break loose. You want to scream and yell, but it's very important to stay calm and in control. Listen very carefully to what the child says and try to remember all that they say. It's very important to tell the child that you believe them without questioning. Children rarely lie about abuse. When we talk about questioning, you have to be very careful not to question the child, because you can help them to misconstrue what happened, and when it goes to the authorities, the child can be a bit confused, so it's better not to question. If you tell them they believe them, say, I believe you, and you can say, tell me more. Say, tell me more. If there's more, tell me more. But don't question them and say, what happened, why, who did this and whatever. It sometimes confuses the child as to what the right story is. Tell the child that it's not their fault and that they are not responsible for the abuse. Tell the child that they did the right thing by telling, and that you will do anything in your power to help them. That's very important to say that it's the right thing, because it'll teach a child that if something happens like this again, then there are people that they can go to and they will be believed. And it's like Karina talking about Lynn and I kind of not believing them in the first place. I think we might have helped Karina a lot more if we had have said, yes, we believe you, and give her more encouragement. If you can do it after the child's disclosed, if you can document everything down using the child's words as best as you can, and also documenting how they behaved while they were telling you. Check your organisation's policy on disclosures if it happens in a church or in a workplace, or even in a school or whatever. Check with them to see what their policy is about disclosing. But if you've been told that that a child has been abused, it's mandatory to report it at least to the police, and we'll talk about that too. Act in the best interests of the child. Let the child know what will happen next, meaning that you can't promise to say that I won't tell anybody. You could say, look, we need to talk to the police about this, and make them comfortable to talk to the police or somebody that needs to know how to act on it. Now we'll talk about how to protect your child. And this is a good one. Tell your child at appropriate ages about sex and abuse and feeling safe. It's very hard to say what ages to say how much, to explain things to them. But we have a lot of resources here, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. Get the resources that you need to get help. Okay, now. Karina and I, we attended an abuse conference put on by our church back at the end of March. We were there for 2 days, and we met Hetty Johnson, who runs Brave Hearts. Now, Brave Hearts, they put out a magazine, I'm not really sure how often, but it's called Break the Silence, and there's many really good issues in there about how to talk to your children, how to stand up for your children when they've been sexually assaulted. They've also put out a few little CDs empowering children to keep safe, and there's 5 songs on this one, and it says yes and no feelings, what are comfortable feelings and what are yucky feelings. what are the warning signs for children. And when we were at the conference, Hetty Johnson got everyone up to sing this song, Private Parts, and it's teaching children that your private part here, here, here and here is not to be touched. Your body is your own, you know. And then there's good and bad secrets. Now, good secrets are about, you know, I'm buying this for somebody's birthday and don't tell, you know. But a bad secret is, you know, this what's happening between us, it's only between us, and you know, it's dirty stuff and not good stuff. And if the child feels uncomfortable, they've got to learn to be able to tell so-and-so's been doing this to me and we can't have bad secrets, you know. But this, and then it's got run and tell somebody that you can trust about the secret, you know. So that's it's a very good little CD, and it makes us smile, but it's very good because the little jingles come and go, and the kids learn the little jingles very quickly, and they could probably even start singing them if somebody's not doing very nice things to them. Teach your child about appropriate touch, and teach your child to trust their feelings and to trust you to support them. Also, teach the child to say no, that it's okay to say no if they feel unsafe. And that's what Karina said when the man that was giving out the lollies, and he wanted them to sit on his lap to give them the lolly. If a child said no, then they knew to go on to somebody else. So if a child knows to say no, then they've got no legs to stand on. Teach your child that they own their own bodies. Teach your child about support people, that if someone touches their private parts or asks you to touch theirs, to tell someone right away. Teach them that nothing's too yucky that you can't tell somebody. If no one listens, keep trying until somebody does. And I think that's a good one to teach your children too. You know, don't just stop at one person, go until somebody listens. All this does not guarantee that abuse won't happen, but we can do our best to prevent it. We can't wrap our children in cotton wool, but if they've got some knowledge and some practical things that they can use to help them, it's empowering them to be able to run away from what they see as bad. Monitor internet usage, Facebook, laptop and mobile phones. And Karina's going to speak about this, and it's mind-boggling.
I didn't realise how mind-boggling this topic was until I read this book, What's Happening to Our Boys. Michael bought it. We were at the Trash and Treasure Markets when we were in Victoria. He picked it up for $5. And he started reading it one night. I was trying to read another book. And he goes, oh, listen to this. And he reads me a quote. I went, okay, that's good. And I went back to my book. A little while later, he goes, listen to this. So I had to put my book down, and then in the end we were both fighting over it. We were reading it together at the same time. But I recommend, it's a very valuable resource to get. The author has also written a book, What's Happening to Our Girls, which Michael's ordered. We haven't got yet. We've got it online, and I'm looking forward to reading that. But as I said, it opened my eyes more to the dangers of modern media, and I think you would be quite surprised.
Who's the author?
The author is Maggie Hamilton. These are the different mediums that pedophiles use. Social networking on Facebook. Now, Facebook opens a big can of worms. You're supposed to be 18 to be on Facebook, but a lot of parents will fudge the date of birth so that their children can be online. And I've seen some of the things happening on Facebook. I just cringe. I know of a young girl who's big into dance, loves dancing, and her little friends that were in her class, they all put on this concert, end of year concert, and there was a professional photographer there. He took photos and he was putting them up on his website, but there had to be a code to access to have a look at them, which was okay for the parents and everything like that. But I saw these little girls talking amongst themselves, and they were saying, I can't get into it. Why can't I get into it? Oh, I've forgotten the code word. What's the code word? And they gave out the code word on Facebook. So anybody could then use that code. I checked it out. I went to the website, I put the code in, and I was able to access and look at all the photos. So if I could do it, anybody, and kids make friends with anybody on Facebook, whether they know them or not, because it's a big thing. Oh, I've got more friends than you. So they may not even know some of who they are friends with on Facebook. So we need to be careful with that. Instant messaging. Now, I did take a few classes from Michael in these things. Instant messaging is, Michael and I are on Gmail for our emails coming in. And it's very handy when he's in another country overseas or he's away from home, we can chat through Gmail. It's a one-on-one conversation, we type back and forth. That's instant messaging. And if children give out their email addresses and things like that, they can chat this way. They can chat through, I think it's MSN is another one that you can use. Online chat rooms. Now, we've heard stories about pedophiles pretending to be children and infiltrating the chat rooms, pretending to be kids and making friends with them and things like that. The thing about chat rooms, though, is that they're open to everybody, so you can have a conversation with more than one person at a time. So there is a way, if you're online, you can monitor some of the conversations, but still it is very hard to tell whether the person that your child is talking to is an actual child or whether it's an adult pretending to be a child. 3D interactive communities. Now, I won't go too much into this one. It is written about in the book. But this is very scary. This is where kids can create a profile. It's like, I don't know if you've seen the movie Avatar. They create what's called an avatar. So it's like this little person of them walking around like a chat room or a community, just bumping into people and having conversations with different people. But the sad thing is there's acting out in these sorts of things too, and some of it can be sexual, which opens them up to that kind of behaviour. Online gaming is another one that opens them up to that kind of behaviour as well. There's Warcraft, there's a few other violent games. It opens them up to violence online, but often some of these games also have violence against women in them. And kids are playing this and learning that violence against women is okay, and it's not. Mobile phones. I'm not sure if you've heard of the latest thing called sexting. It has been in the news recently. There was a report of 13-year-old girls taking photos of themselves naked and sending the pictures to the boys that they liked, because there's a competition out there to get the boys' attention. And so the boys have that picture on their phone. The thing is, the girls don't get in trouble for that, but if the boy then takes that picture and SMSs it or sends it to another boy on his mobile phone, that boy can get in trouble for it. It's illegal. It's actually child pornography. That's what it's classed as. The thing is, they will get these pictures too, and they'll put them up online and say, did you know this is what so-and-so did, sort of thing. Once it's up online, it's very hard to take it down, and it can end up in all sorts of places. Webcams. It's very difficult in this day and age because our laptops already have a webcam built into them, and if children have a laptop and it's in their bedroom, it's very hard to control this. That's why it's better if the computer is in the middle of the house, in the lounge room or the dining room, where there's a lot of activity going back and forth, because they've got cameras in their rooms. Kids these days, like we see on Facebook, they love to put photos up of themselves and say, hey, look, this is what I've done or whatever. They do the same thing with cameras. The abusers will see that and they'll start grooming, and they'll start making friends with the child, and then bit by bit they'll get them to do things on their web cameras that you don't want your children to be doing. Okay. There is a very good website on that topic. It's at the Queensland Police website. It's called Who's Chatting to Your Kids. There's a booklet there that you can download. I think it's 16 pages and print off. It's got a lot more information and stuff on that media, on the computers, mobile phones, all that sort of thing. You can print it off there. I found it a really good website. Okay, Mum was talking about Hetty. Hetty Johnson started up Bravehearts. This is her book. We listened to her briefly tell her testimony when we were at the conference in May. And she's a very interesting person to listen to, and her story is very interesting. But her story was that she was in the middle of a campaign. She was running to be a Democrat in the elections, and while her time was taken up in campaigning, her husband and her 7-year-old daughter went to New Zealand to visit his parents. And while they were there, they discovered that his father had been abusing their 7-year-old daughter. Now, this was a very close family. They had no reason to suspect the grandfather of this kind of behaviour at all, and so it was a big surprise to them. The husband was absolutely devastated. He had a close relationship with his father, and he couldn't believe this was happening, and he rang her from New Zealand, devastated, and told her the news. And she's the sort of person that needs to have information right now, right then, to process it all and work it all out. And so after a little while, she got on the phone and she started ringing place after place after place to get help, saying, I need it, this is what's happened, what do I do? I don't know what to do. And she tried place after place after place, and they kept referring her on to somebody else. And she had quite a list of places that she had tried before she finally got through to somebody who could give her the advice and the information that could help her. So as a result of that, she decided to set up a foundation that would help others that are going through the same sort of thing. So she set up Bravehearts. It's a great website, and there you'll get all the sorts of information and things you'll need, and I'll have the slide up in a minute. But if you know a crime has been committed, if you know that abuse has taken place, the first people to call, I mean, if it happens in the church, you would talk to your child protection officer, whatever, but the first people to call are the police. It is mandatory to report it. However, if it's only the grooming that we've told you about today, if it's a matter of that, police cannot charge a person with a crime with grooming, and they can't investigate it. So if you see that an adult is grooming a child, then you would need to ring and talk to DOCS, the Department of Community Services. If you find you're not getting anywhere there, perhaps ring Lifeline and they might be able to help. Otherwise, as I said, there are other foundations or places out there where you can look for help. This is Braveheart's website. As I said, they've got all sorts of things. There are all sorts of resources and tools there that you can get online to use. Also, what they do is they've managed to set up White Balloon Day. We can see our balloons here. White Balloon Day will be celebrated on September 7, and it's to make people aware of child abuse. To get the message out there, to get people to wake up and see how much of a problem it really is, so that we can do something about it. There's Kids Helpline. There's another website that you can go to get information. There's Childwise. There's NAPCAN.
We hope that you have learnt a lot this afternoon. We hope that you can take it on board. We're just trying to, as a church, train people in the area of child abuse so that you can be aware of it. It is a difficult topic, but it's something that I'm really passionate about because of where Karina's been on her journey, and working in it for 11 years with people listening to family problems in it. It's really brought home a burden on my heart that we need to train our children, to give them resources to be able to empower them so that they can be in charge of themselves. So I hope that you've enjoyed the program this afternoon. We've enjoyed giving it out to you, and I pray that you can take it home and do something with it. So thank you and thanks for listening to us.